Welcome. We're about to unpack a question that's been debated for, well, centuries. What's the deal with statues and images in Christian worship? We're going to explore the Catholic understanding of this by really digging into the theology and the history behind this ancient practice.
Okay, let's just dive right into the main puzzle here. Because for a lot of people, when you see a church filled with statues, it brings up a really big question. How does this fit with one of the most fundamental commandments in the Bible? And right here, you can see the tension laid out pretty clearly. On one side, you've got one of the 10 commandments from Exodus, which seems like a flat-out ban on making images and bowing to them. And on the other, you have this centuries-old Christian tradition that seems to do exactly that. So how do we make sense of this? Well, the key, as it turns out, is all about understanding what that commandment was really getting at. You see, the sin of idolatry isn't really about making something. It's about the belief that a piece of wood or stone is God. It's about giving that object the worship that is owed to God and God alone. So it's a question of worship, not a question of craftsmanship. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you look closely at the Old Testament, the Bible itself seems to push back on the idea of a total, absolute ban on all religious images. I mean, check this out. In the very same books of the Bible, God himself actually commands people to make sacred art. He tells the Israelites to craft these golden cherubim to sit on top of the Ark of the Covenant, which was the most sacred object in all of Judaism. He tells Moses to make a bronze serpent to heal people. And the temple in Jerusalem, it was absolutely filled with carvings. So the evidence from Scripture itself really suggests the ban was never about art in general, but very specifically about worshiping fake gods or idols. But the single biggest thing that shaped the Christian view on images came with Jesus Christ. And honestly, this is the real game changer. It just fundamentally changed what was even possible. Think about it. Before Jesus, the understanding was that God the Father had no body, no face, he was pure spirit, so you couldn't depict him. But then, in the person of Jesus, the invisible God became visible. God essentially gave us his own self-image by becoming a real, tangible, seeable human being. And this is the absolute core of the whole argument. And this led to a completely new way of thinking. Making an image of Jesus actually became a powerful statement of faith. It's a way of visually declaring, yes, we believe God really became a man. In fact, refusing to depict Jesus could almost be seen as leaning into an early heresy called Docetism, which was the idea that Jesus only appeared to be human. Okay, so this brings us to probably the most critical distinction in how these images are actually used, the huge difference between two kinds of honor. Catholic teaching draws a really sharp line in the sand here. There's the Greek word latria, which means the absolute adoration and worship that belongs to God and only God. But then there's dulia, and that's a different kind of honor and reverence, kind of like the profound respect you'd show for a war hero or a beloved grandparent, or in this case, a hero of the faith. And this quote from St. Thomas Aquinas just nails the principle. When someone prays in front of a crucifix, the prayer isn't directed at the wood and the metal. The idea is that the honor passes through the image to the one it represents, in this case, Christ. The image is just a focal point. It's not the final destination. Okay, you might say, but what about the actual act of bowing? Doesn't the commandment forbid that? Well, like a lot of things, the meaning of a gesture is all about the context and the intent behind it. The Bible itself shows people bowing out of respect, not worship. You've got King Solomon bowing to his own mother, Bathsheba. And in the book of Revelation, it's even prophesied that people will bow at the feet of believers as a sign of honor. Same action, completely different intent. But you should know, this was not always a settled issue. Not at all. The early church was pretty wary of images, mainly because they wanted to be very distinct from pagan idolatry. And that tension just exploded in the 8th century with the iconoclasts, who were literally image breakers. But then, in 787, the Second Council of Nicaea formally defended the use of icons, basing their whole argument on the Incarnation. The debate didn't stop there, of course. It flared right back up during the Protestant Reformation. So, putting the theological arguments aside for a second, what's the ultimate purpose of these images? What do they actually do for believers today? Well, there are a few big reasons. First, like we've seen, they're a constant physical reminder of that core belief, that God became visible and lived among us. Second, because we're physical people, physical objects can really help focus our minds and hearts on spiritual things. They can be a real aid to prayer. And third,
Images of the saints act as a reminder of this great cloud of witnesses, this huge family of faith that spans all of time, connecting believers today with all those who came before. So, when you boil it all down, this whole discussion leads to a really fascinating question about faith. The Catholic view is that since we're beings of both body and spirit, physical symbols aren't a barrier to the divine, they can actually be a bridge. And it kind of leaves all of us to think about it. What role does the visible world play in our own journey toward the invisible?